This next session, and it's our final one, should run for about 30 minutes, including questions, hopefully. This will be for projects who are above a estimated total cost of $250,000. We're going to walk through the 4 areas of the business case, which are the executive summary, the case for change, the analysis of your proposal, and also implementation. Now, we're going to be referencing a few key materials throughout this stage, and so for those of you in the room, we've made them available for you to pick up, and we've also emailed them out for everyone who's watching on the webinar. So we've got the business case template. Now, this looks confusing on the screen, but we'll go from left to right. So we've got the business case template. So that's the one that you can fill out with your business case. Next to that, we've got the Wilson Sportsfield Light Tower installation by the fictional Kent Council. That one is for is a sort of a bit of a guidance as to how you would fill it out. So if you're not sure how to structure a question or what actually needs to go there, that's a good resource to go to. We've also got the business case guidelines. Now, these walk through the business case in each section and give you some helpful hints and stuff on how to complete it. As Laura mentioned, that was designed for the Regional Growth Fund, which is the one that's being run by the Department of Premier and Cabinet. There's a few things in there that reference who to contact and the assessment process that they're doing. Don't worry about those sections of the book. We're your key contacts, and the information we can provide you today and throughout the process will be relevant. This is just a template and a bit of a guide on how to get the material done. Also, there's the guidance sheet there, which we've also handed out. That's got the areas for each criteria that will be assessed by the assessors. A key point to remember is that when you're writing a business case, you're writing it for a panel of people who are going to assess it. They're going to be people from the sector and also people from infrastructure as well. So they will be reading your application. They'll be having this assessment guide next to them, and they'll be making sure you tick off all those areas. That's an important thing to keep in mind when writing the sections. Now, up on the screen now, this is just a bit of a reference for you, so don't get too freaked out about it now, but basically what it does is says where in the 4 criteria that we've mentioned in the first stage, where they match up to which sections in the template. So if you're wondering, hang on, which one is the case for where the capacity to deliver, that's section 4, for example. But you can refer back to this later, and as we said, we'll make these slides available to everyone. So Laura, you're going to tell us a bit about the business case template and how to use it?
Indeed. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at the business case template, but we're going to walk through it now anyhow. So the business case is all about presenting your project to the assessment panel in the best light possible. It's a framework for you to prove the worth of your project and show that you also have the skills to deliver it. The business case gives government a way to identify which projects will make the biggest impact for New South Wales. As we go through the template, please keep in mind that the business case is also a live planning document, and you can use this to help you find the best way to deliver your project.
Just further to that point, so while you are writing it for the assessors and to get it through this process, the idea of it is to have it as a reference point going forward. So there's components of the business case that we'll touch on, like governance and the milestones. It'll help you track your project. So you should be referring to this going forward. It'll help you deliver your project. So it's just a...
All right, so the process... Ooh.
Have you skipped over one, Jess?
There we go. So the process for developing the business case is shown here, and you'll notice that the business case template is also structured in the same way. You start with your planning, you build your argument for why your project is needed, and then you talk about how you're going to deliver it successfully. There's an example business case on the website, and those in the room have got this. Please note the value of this project is around $300,000. So the amount of information represented in this business case is a baseline and a good reference point for you as you develop your own business cases. Just a couple of pointers on the information that you provide in the business case. It doesn't need to be lengthy here. And some guiding principles you can use in structuring your information is to keep it very succinct, so get straight to the point of what assessors really need to know to feel confident about your application. Make sure it's evidence-based, so the more support that you can provide to show the assessors that what you're saying is backed up by external information is going to be incredibly valuable. Examples of this is things like quotes in your budget and letters of support demonstrating the need from the community. Lastly, make sure you really showcase your idea. So make sure the assessors walk away from reading your application feeling that there is definite worth in investing in this project.
Right, so the first step, I guess, in your business case would be the executive summary. This is essentially a short version of your projects. For those of you who are watching this through from the first first session, will notice some repetitiveness here, but what we're doing is making sure this information maps correctly with the template. So the first section is the executive summary, and this will be the first thing that anyone reads when they pick up your business case. So it should be striking, and it should get to the point of what you're trying to deliver and why you want to do it. A bit of a tip for this particular part is writing this after you've finished your rest of your business case. Do the bulk of it, get the work done, be happy with it, and then write the executive summary afterwards, because you know exactly what you're writing about. Otherwise, they keep going back and changing the executive summary as your project changes. The next bit is the background information. This is if you're following along in the template, is section 2.1 for background. This is about establishing some details around your project, but also your community as well. So don't go too deep here. We don't need to know the life story of everything. We don't want to bore the assessors, but it needs to give a good idea about what your organisation is about and why this project is important to your organisation and why your organisation is important to your community as well. It's a sort of a what would you say, the Goldilocks principle, Laura, of a little bit but not too much, is the sort of what you want to put in this section here. Moving on to the next bit about case for change, Laura's going to walk you through sections 2.2 to 2.4.
Okay, so let's talk through the process or the logical progression that you want assessors to follow as they read through this part. So firstly, start with why the change is needed. This could be showing your community's strong need for the project. Then show how this aligns with the fund's objectives. So remember back in the general session we showed you the 4 objectives, and they're also shown in the assessment guidance. Make sure you link what you're doing back to meeting those objectives. And then talk about what the outcomes would be. So where are you going? What does your end goal look like? So why the need for change? Talk about how delivering your project would deliver the Regional Cultural Fund objectives. So, for example, this might touch on how delivering your project will improve the region's cultural offering, or how delivering your project represents value for money. Other government objectives you might like to reference here would include things like perhaps the state priorities or Premier's priorities, and any other regional or local plans or strategies that might be relevant. Lastly, outline what the expected outcome from your project is, so where you're going. And it's ideal to do this in quantitative terms as much as possible. So if you can put it into terms like delivering this project is expected to deliver a 5% increase in visitor numbers, for example. Also, it might be something to do with an increase in revenue. In doing this, make sure you say who the beneficiaries are. So who are the people that are going to benefit from your project? Make sure you include everybody. You'll notice that some material from your EOI application from Criteria 1 might be useful here. So have a look back at that for some inspiration.
No worries. So we're just going to move on now, staying within that same section 2, but moving on to section 2.5. And this is stakeholder and community supports. This is a very important section. As we said, I may say it's important, but I'm going to say that about all the sections. And so we should be remembering that they're all weighted at 25%. So we need to put a good, strong effort across all the areas to get a good score. So this is pretty self-explanatory. It's about demonstrating that the community supports your project. So you can do that Traditionally, it's done through letters of support, but there are other ways of demonstrating support for your project. It could be by letters, by petitions. It could be done by surveys, newspaper articles, or even letters to the editor about your particular project. And we had one organisation in the EOI who ran a bake sale to drum up some support for their project, and it was good to see someone thinking outside the box. So that was really, really good. One thing to include as well is a communication plan. So that's about identifying the stakeholders in your project, be them council, be them your members, be them other community groups, or just the general public. How are you going to communicate with them to make sure they know what's happening with your project? So an example that I use is, for example, if the school regularly uses your facility, you might want to put the principal down as a key contact, and you'll be informing them about the process because they may use it from time to time and it won't be available. That's just an example. All right, so moving on to section 3 now, the next section. This is the analysis of the proposal. So this is where a bulk of the work is in the business case template. And this is where the applicant needs to demonstrate that their proposal offers the best value for money. Now, this first part, 3.1, is where you outline the objectives and the key indicators. So basically what this is like is establishing the problem that you're trying to fix. So that could be that you've got a lack of cultural availability in your community, or that there's not enough space for performances in your community, or that you can't bring good exhibitions to your community. When we're trying to fix that, and your project's going to do that. So in that next column, you put your objectives in there, and so the objectives is how you're going to achieve that. That could be that should be based obviously around your project and what sort of things you're going to deliver to fix those problems you outlined in the first part there. And the last part there is the success indicators. So it's all good to say you got a problem and you're going to fix it, but you got to put some measurements around that. So what is improved attendance? What is bringing more cultural availability? You've got to put some measurement around that so we can then measure that for success down the track. Now, with your success indicators and also your objectives, Laura is going to walk you through a methodology called the SMART objectives, and it'll help you develop those. So, Laura?
Okay, so you may be familiar with this process of using the acronym SMART to develop objectives. So basically the S stands for specific, so don't be vague, keep it very snappy and get straight to the point. Next is measurable, so this is where you state the success criteria. So how would you know that your objective has been met? So if your goal is to build more gallery space and the objective might be to provide your community with a space to display works from local artists and raise their profile, success criteria might be that a number of people that you're expecting attended annually, which is an increase on the annual attendance last year, so you can demonstrate the change. You might show that a certain number of local artists were involved, and you could also demonstrate the change between now and before. And you can also demonstrate that a certain amount of revenue increase has been received due to your project. There are some other more soft examples like community satisfaction, which are much more difficult to put a figure onto. You might create a measurement criteria for this around a survey or a questionnaire. There are some other innovative ways that you can measure things that it's not so easy to put a figure on. Next is achievable, so be realistic. The assessors will be looking at this closely. They don't want to see things that they know are impossible to happen, so make sure you keep it real. And make sure it's relevant. So it's always important to tie these things back to the Regional Cultural Fund objectives and make sure that you show alignment with them. Lastly, set a date. So make sure that the objective achievement has a date so that you know when it should be achieved by. You might want to allow some contingency in here because of periods like Christmas, which can be quite disruptive, and other things like end of financial year is also quite a busy time. So just be mindful of that.
Right, so moving on from section 3.1 to 3.2. So I'll keep referencing the section so you can follow in your business case template, just so you're aware of what we're talking about, and you'll also marry it up with the hints that are in there as well. So this is the base case. So some of you will be familiar with the concept of a base case. It's essentially what your project is now. So that what would happen if nothing changed and we continue on the same path. What this does is allow us to then measure against what would have happened and what the project will achieve on top of that. That could be you have a gallery. I keep referring back to a gallery because we're in one, but so we have a gallery. It's currently this size, and if we don't upgrade it, we'll have sort of plateauing attendance. But if we expand it, we can get new exhibitions in. We can see attendance go up. That's a sort of the reason for a base case. Now, in the next section there, section 3.3, you need to describe ways of achieving this objective, but like different ways from what you've put forward. So I'll go back to the gallery example. You might say we want to refresh the current gallery and sort of rearrange it a bit, and that might allow us to have new exhibitions. That might be a cheaper version than what you've proposed, which might be a new wing. Another option could be 2 new wings, for example, to allow more art to be on show and to attract more visitors. But you need to describe why those 2 options aren't the best one and what you've picked is the way forward. What this does is tell the assessors that you've considered other ways of doing it. It could be more basic than that. It could be like you've basically looked at 2 different options for the lighting that you've provided, but the one you've picked is the best one. So basically, it makes assessors feel like you've considered other options. You haven't had a narrow view about what you're doing, and that you've prepared to do that. And now in the next section there is about information about your proposal. So this should define exactly what you're doing. So it should be unequivocal about what your project is doing and what it is not doing. So to that effect, you should also include any exclusions. So for example, if you're doing a fit out of a building and you've already got another project on the go, which is the construction of the building, you need to include that this project you're asking for is not for the construction of the building, it's for the fit out. That way it's unequivocal between what's being done and what isn't being done, and so the assessors know what they're assessing. Also highlight any key related work. So, for example, I know if you're building a new gallery and it's sponsored by council might also be building a road or access point that's not part of your project, but it will be obviously vital to it going forward. If that's happening to the side, that needs to be a reference in this section here. And that could be anything related to your project as well. Other projects that you have going on alongside of it, need to mention them here. I think that's it for that one. We're going to move on to section 3.5, which is projected cost.
All right, so this is the budget area. So in your budget, you really need to communicate to the assessors what it costs to deliver your project and how you estimated the cost, so the analysis that underpins the cost estimates. Make sure you include information on the contingency allowances. The key objective here is that you want the assessors to read your budget and feel confident that you have a strong understanding of the full cost to deliver the project. They also want to see that you can manage and control the budget during delivery. They also need to know that your project will be viable in the long term. This is a really key point, that assessors will not score applications well if the project doesn't appear to be viable. So please focus on this in your analysis. Make sure that you give it a real thorough and accurate representation in your ongoing operational costs.
So some of you would have received an email from us with the documentation for today, and in that documentation was a budget template, which is intended for and is required by the category, which is the under $250,000 category. If you want to use that budget to develop your budget, please feel free to do so. The assumption is the business case is that you have your own budget that's outside, and you would include it in here, and only the key bits would be put into the template. So if you want to use that sample budget, it's very, very simple template. Feel free to use that one in that bit. Moving on to cost-benefit analysis. Okay, this looks like a scary section, but hopefully after I've finished explaining it to everyone, it won't be so scary. The key takeaway is there's 2 elements to a cost-benefit analysis. or for the purposes of this proposal, is that the first one is just literally identifying the benefits and the costs. So your budget identifies the costs for you, so you just need to match them up in this section. But identifying the benefits is a really key point. So you need to look at your project and look at your community and how your project will provide benefits to the community. So that might not just be to your members, it could be beyond that, it could be to other organisations, etc. And if you possibly can, add a number to those. So that might be if a dollar figure if possible, or increase in participation, any sort of measurement you can is good, but it's not required. Now, I'm not sure if you've got any projects that are requesting a project of over $5 million, and if you are, you are required to submit a cost-benefit ratio, and we will talk to you about how to do that. So that's not something we're going to get into today. There's only about 6 projects in that category. Because those projects are over $5 million, their business case needs to be submitted to New South Wales Treasury, and to do that, it needs to have a cost-benefit ratio, but we'll cover that off with everyone before that. So if you're under $5 million total cost, you don't have to do the cost-benefit ratio, so just ignore that. You just need to list your benefits. So it's quite an easy bit, really. Just think about broad and wide about what your project will do and just try and quantify that. Now, you'll notice in the template there, it has a grey box, I believe, that says the department will do your BCR for you. Please ignore that. That's one of the Department of Premier and Cabinet instructions. So to give you some context around that particular part, in the other regional growth funds that are all 1 million plus, they're required to submit a BCR of over 1 because their funding is coming from a certain source that requires that, which is the Poles and Wires money. The funding for our particular project is not from that, and so therefore doesn't require a BCR over 1. That may sound very confusing, but the key takeaway is if your project is under $5 million, all you need to do is list your benefits. And if it's over $5 million, we will talk to you about what that means. So financial appraisal, Laura.
Okay, so this section relates back to your budget figures. Here you'll need to explain different aspects of the figures that you provided in your budget. You need to prove how robust your budget is. So at section 3.7, this is where you need to show assessors that the cost estimates you provided are sound. You may provide supporting documents here, and these should be uploaded and attached in Smarty Grants. At section 3.8, you need to outline how you will fund your project and how your ongoing operating and maintenance costs will be covered. This is also where you need to show that you've maximised all co-investment opportunities. This is the same message that was communicated throughout the expression of interest phase. At section 3.9, the last, maximise all co-investment opportunities. So co-funding, co-investment, it was the same message that was given during the expression of interest application.
And people who have progressed with the co-investment they've got, so it was obviously acceptable. So, yeah.
At section 3.9, this is where you demonstrate the financial health of your organisation and that you can operate into the future. Showing the ongoing viability is a key requirement here. It's something that the assessors really look very closely at. Applicants who do well here will really be put in a good light in the scoring with the panel.
Essentially, the panel doesn't want to fund a project that gets built and then can't function once it's built. So it's about proving that, and it's just about doing the work and lining it up and showing that you can operate. I'm sure it's not an issue, but it's just about making the assessors feel comfortable with that. So moving on to the next section, which is milestones. This is an important section, and one of the key points I made, I think it was in the first section and I reiterated it in the second section, was about the differences between the expression of interest application and this one. The expression of interest application focused lots on the idea. There's lots of questions around the idea and what it means and what are you going to achieve, and that's still important here, but where this particular application is more heavier is in the planning and in the budget areas as well. So that's where we really need to prove that you can fund it and you can run it and then you can deliver it. Because we've sold us the idea, now we want to see how you can deliver it. And that's why areas like the budget that Laura just spoke about and the milestones now are really important. So in this section, we're going to outline the key events and decision points in your project. The milestone sequencing and estimated duration are crucial to demonstrating that you've thought through the process. So estimated cost in this section should be lining up with your budget. So if you've got a milestone that is doing X, there should be a corresponding expense that can be explained in your budget. Now, in the template, there's no cost column in the budget template, but we suggest that you add one. It's quite easy. It's a Word template. You go right-click, add column. It's important to have costs associated with your milestones. If you have any trouble with that, please just give us a call and we can help you with that. It's just something that we think you should have because it helps manage your milestones well. It's also important to have milestones that are achievable and that are realistic because we will be using this as part of our contracting phase. So especially for larger projects, there'll be milestone payments for particular parts of it. So that might be if you're building something new, could be the slab, could be walls up or something like. There will be milestone payments for parts of it, and we'll negotiate that with successful applicants, but they'll be based on the milestones that you put forward in your application. So they need to be accurate. Would you like to talk about risk?
Okay, the final section. All right, at 4.2, you need to explain who's involved in the project and what their roles and responsibilities are. That's an opportunity here to outline the skills and experience of your project team. So if you have a strong track record and have delivered this sort of thing before, make sure you include CVs that say that. Otherwise, you can talk about demonstrating your applicable skills to deliver this project. The next three sections all relate to risk. So at section 4.3, you need to show the assessors that you've done a thorough risk assessment so you understand what could go wrong with the project and you're actively involved in managing that. At section 4.3, you need to show the 4.4, legal issues. All right, so if any aspect of your project involves legal oversight or some sort of approval, make sure that you give an analysis of this here. You should also address this at the next section, which is the risk management section. So this is where you talk about your plan to manage any risks or to prevent them from happening. Showing a really robust risk management plan will make assessors feel comfortable that you can deliver the project even if things go wrong.
All right. I think that finishes it up for us. So we understand that there's a lot of information in one go, and we don't expect everyone to get all of it straight away. That's why we're going to be running the support throughout the application process. And as we said, if you've got particular areas of concern or that you want more information on, send them in to us and we can organise a teleconference for that. Now, we've got probably 5 minutes for questions. So if we have any from the floor, we'll start with that.